Hey guys, it's me, cyoubx. I know I haven't made a video in a while, but there have been a lot of things on my mind recently about cubing and the community and just general things that I feel about the community that I kind of want to address. And actually, now that it's near the end of 2017 and we're going into 2018, I feel like this is a pretty prime opportunity for me to talk about these things. Now, as a little bit of background for those of you who may be new to my channel, I started YouTube back in 2009 and I started cubing, I think, back in 2007 or 2008. So I've been in the community more or less for around a decade. And throughout this process, I think I've been parts of a lot of different components of the community, including making YouTube videos, as you know, but also participating in online forums, going to competitions, and even designing my own cube. So I have sort of this unique perspective about where the community has been when I first started, and I've seen it evolve over the years, and there are some things that I like, and in general I really like how the community is progressing, but there are also some things that I'm concerned about, and these are things that I want to talk about in this video. But really the three main categories I want to focus on in this video are competitions, the online community, and sponsorships. Back when I first started cubing, competitions were super chill. They're very relaxed, and part of that might have been because I was in Minnesota and so there weren't as many competitors, but I think the general reason for that across the entire world really was because there were fewer people at these competitions. Because of that, things were generally very lax. Back then, if people didn't really understand regulations or if they had misjudged a +2 or something like that, it wasn't really that big of a deal because delegates were there and the ratio of delegates to competitors was relatively large. There just wasn't really any big snafu with how solves are being judged or just the way that competitions were run in general. These days, though, there's a lot more competitors, and so I think something that we're all seeing a lot more in recent times is that there are just a lot of issues with how solves are being judged, and I think this is brought to attention the most when we're talking about sort of world record solves or national record solves, things that are really competitive. But this is really an issue with every competitor. All of these things happen all the time, even really simple things like just calling 8 seconds and 12 seconds. A lot of judges don't do that appropriately, and I think this needs to be addressed. Now, of course, I'm not speaking for the WCA, but it seems like what they're trying to do is they're trying to push cubing into this sort of more mainstream or more publicized or more professional setting, which I think is awesome. However, I think there are some barriers to entering that kind of state. In particular, I think a lot of it has to do with how competitions are run. I think there are sort of two major issues. The first is that there's this expectation that every competitor and therefore every judge actually knows the regulations, but that's just not very realistic. And I'll be completely honest with you, I myself have never read the full regulations on the WCA site. I know that sounds bad, but in my case and in my defense, it's not that big of a deal because the events that I do are very straightforward, and the events that I do, I know the regulations really well. That being said, I know that most people also have not fully read the regulations, which is why sometimes when you have issues about logos being placed on the wrong places, or if you have color schemes that are weird, people don't really know what to do with that because they don't read the regulations. Compounded with that is the fact that a lot of competitors are very young, and I think it's somewhat unrealistic to have them read something that's very dry. Basically what I'm getting at is that the regulations are there, and it's really nice that there's something to reference, but the expectation that all competitors, including people who are, 6 or 7 years old, know the regulations is just completely unrealistic. And so if you want to enforce things that make things more professional, you need a way of enforcing that. Otherwise, you're just always going to have these issues at competitions where people just don't know what they're doing. The second thing, which I think is actually far more damaging, is that judges are appointed sort of by random. They either volunteer or they're delegated by someone else, or the incentive for them to judge is basically to get their fee waived. All of these things are sort of conflicts of interest in one way or another, and there needs to be a better system in place in order to have more fair judging. If you take any other sport or activity, judges are usually non-partial. They want to be as objective as possible, and they also have a lot of experience in their craft. But at cubing competitions, a lot of judges aren't even really competitors, right? They might know the regulations, and that's cool, but they don't necessarily know how to judge appropriately. On the flip side of that, you also have judges who are really young and really sort of immature, and they might get very distracted, or they might get enamored by whoever they're judging. And that's also really bad because that applies additional pressure to the competitor, and it also just makes for really poor staffing. In general, if you want cubing to be more professional overall, It's not just that you need delegates and you need sort of these official cubes that you can use and official timers. You also need some way of officiating competitions that are standardized across the board. And I know that there are already things written down in regulations to help that, but those things are very rarely enforced. There needs to be a way to proactively sort of reinforce these regulations rather than going case by case when weird things arise. Because believe it or not, it's very possible, in fact, I'm sure this happens all the time, where there are issues with judging, but both the competitor and judge just aren't that experienced, and so both parties are okay with the decision, even though the decision may have been incorrect. As far as the online community goes, in general, I'm pretty happy with where YouTube is now compared to when I first started. I'm also really happy to see that there are a lot of Facebook groups popping up about cubing, and there's basically something for everyone, which is awesome. Reddit's also a really good resource for new cubers. But there are some concerns I have about YouTube, and these are concerns I've always had, but I think these days it's much more pertinent than it was, 5 years ago. It's basically always been this case where really popular YouTubers will receive cubes and they review them, and then those reviews and those opinions impact the sale of those cubes. And this is not unique to cubing. People test products for companies all the time. This is really, really popular among tech bloggers or people who do tech reviews. But it's a little bit different for cubing because the audience is relatively young and the audience is relatively small. And I would say that the majority of people who form opinions about hardware before buying it actually base their opinions off of one of, 5 or 6 people, and that's really scary. I think a lot of times when one person who's very popular says something about a cube, that's what everyone who watches their videos takes as their own opinion, and that's what they sort of go with. But then you get this issue of someone else who may be less popular saying the complete opposite opinion about the cube, and then there's sort of this whole controversy about who's right and who to believe. And that's not really the atmosphere that you want to create. Instead of creating an echo chamber, I think people who review cubes and people who have YouTube channels should be really cognizant and really careful about the words that they use and the opinions that they share with their viewers. I think it's just really important for you to recognize that your words have a lot of impact, and on a community that's this small, that kind of impact can really create this sort of groupthink or echo chamber mentality that could be really bad for people. Especially these days, cubes are really expensive. Back then, cubes were, $10 or less, and so it wasn't really a big deal if people bought a cube that wasn't that great, even though you said it was good, because frankly, it just wasn't that big of a deal. But these days, cubes are literally over $100 in some cases, and so if you're telling people that that's the best cube in the world, and you have a lot of people buy it, and they realize, oh, it's okay, but it's not that good, then you're kind of wasting people's money and time. And I think if you're a person who a lot of people watch and a lot of people look up to, you do kind of have a responsibility to be honest and to give opinions that are genuine, that you truly believe in. And this sort of leads me into the last part, which is sponsorships. I know a lot of people these days are really striving to get sponsored by cube stores or cube companies, and it's because they give out really awesome jackets and other things that people want to be a part of, and I totally understand that. But I think people need to understand that being sponsored is not a one-way road. This is a sort of mutually beneficial relationship between the store and the cuber, and if that's not maintained, then it's just not a healthy relationship. I see this all the time where people ask whether they're fast enough or if they have enough subscribers in order to be sponsored by a certain store, and those really aren't the right questions to ask. I think if you're someone who's either starting out on YouTube or if you're just getting into cubing, you need to realize that you need to add value to that company as well. So it's not just about numbers, it's about your ability to actually bring revenue to that store. Either way you do it, whether it be getting good at cubing or by making a YouTube channel, requires a lot of effort and a lot of time. So if you think that you can just get sponsored by a store and get free things, that's not how things work. Overall, I want to say that I'm very happy with the way that the cubing community is going. I think it's growing for a reason. It's because people in the community are really welcoming in general. That being said, as more people enter the community, there's more and more conflicts. You see all the time now people calling each other noobs or just being sort of elitist, but that's not really, I think, the mentality that you want to have. I think if you want to keep cubing as sort of your own hobby, then you need to take steps to making it the community that you want it to be. For example, if you think that the community right now is really toxic, the way to respond to that is not to be toxic to other people, but it's instead to be the change you want to see, right? If you want the community to be really wholesome, or if you want it to be really competitive, then you need to do things for yourself that make you part of that community that you want. And I know what I'm saying sounds really cliche, and I think in most activities or sports it would be, but I think there are so few people in cubing right now that your individual actions actually make a really big impact. Just think about the fact that if you go to a competition and you do something cool, or if you do something really nice for someone, that's going to have a really big impact because other people are going to see it. It's not going to be buried under everything else that's going on. You will be noticed, and I think that's really important to think about. But all is to say that this community is ours for the taking, and if you want it to go in a certain direction, then you need to be part of that change. And we're all responsible for shaping this community. Do not sell yourself short when it comes to the impact that you can have on others. So with that being said, I did just want to share this because I think right now cubing is in this sort of critical point where the community is growing much faster than maybe regulations can change, but we're still small enough such that if we all concentrate and make effort to making positive changes, we can still do it. So I think going forward in the next year or two, it is really important for all of us to take ownership of this community and make it as good as we can. With that, if there's any pressing issues or questions that you guys have, please just leave a comment below and I'll try to get back to you. If a lot of people have really similar questions or concerns, then I might make an additional video addressing that. Thank you guys for watching this rather long video, and until next time, toodles.